Today with Rabbi David Rosen, a very important figure in the interfaith dialogue, especially in the Jewish-Catholic dialogue. He serves as assistant to the Chief Rabbinate of Israel, to the Commission of the Chief Rabbinate of Israel for interreligious relations. He is involved in this area since more than 30 years. Served as rabbi in Cape Town, South Africa. Had the privilege to be the chief rabbi of Ireland, which is a very special place, full of history. Why? Because the first chief rabbi of Ireland was the very famous Rav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Medinat Israel. He was the successor of Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Cook, and had the privilege to be the chief rabbi, Ashkenazi rabbi in Israel on the time of the independence of Israel. Received many awards, recognitions. He was granted a papal knighthood in 2005 for his contributions for the Jewish-Catholic reconciliation. In 2010, was made commander of the British Empire by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II for promoting interfaith understanding and cooperation. My dear friend, David, tell us about your history.
Thank you very much.
As a promoter of dialogue between Jews and Catholic in special, and interfaith dialogue at large.
Thank you very much, Avi. It's a pleasure to be talking with you. Allow me, you didn't mention the organizations I work for, and therefore, as they pay my salary, I think I should acknowledge them formally. And I'm in the International Director of Interreligious Affairs of the American Jewish Committee. If I may make a joke, but it's a serious joke, but it's a joke. You mentioned one of my great illustrious predecessors, that I was honored to sit on the chair of Rabbi Herzog. But my greatest claim to fame is that before I was in South Africa, I was the chaplain to the Israeli Defense Forces in West Sinai when Israel still controlled the Sinai. Now, to the best, I was in West Sinai, and to the best of my knowledge, between Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, and this rabbi, there was no rabbi located there on a regular basis. So I claim to be Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses' successor, and now we gave Sinai back to the Egyptians, so I don't have even competition for the title. So, at any rate, to be serious now, I actually came to interfaith relations in South Africa out of a commitment to our shared profound belief in Judaism's passion for social justice. I was in South Africa at the height of apartheid, of an iniquitous, evil, racist system. And it was important for me to be seen to challenge this system, or at least to be seen to be doing something to counteract it. And I wanted my community to be seen that way. And I wanted it especially to be seen by the other races in South Africa that often had misconceptions because of the racial separation within South Africa. One of the few ways you could do that without immediately running foul of the authorities and ending up in jail or being expelled from the country, which in the end I was through interfaith relations. So I founded the Interfaith Forum, a council of Christians, Muslims, and Jews, for the purpose of getting to know one another, working together for social justice, but above all, educating us about one another. And so I didn't come to it out of a passion for interfaith relations. I came to it because it was a vehicle for the promotion of ethical values, of Judaism, which I believe are central values of the other great world religions. But as I got involved in this, I discovered something that initially was quite shocking for me. I really hadn't had any real interaction with people of other religions before, not with leaders. And I was rather naively ignorant. I assumed that they knew who I was, in other words, who my tradition and my heritage is, and that they had some information about Judaism. And I was shocked to discover that not just the Muslims, but the Christians were incredibly ignorant about Jews and Judaism. And I realized it was terribly important for them to get to know me in order to overcome the prejudices, the stereotypes, and the misunderstandings. But then it sort of hit me almost like an epiphany. Yes, they were ignorant about me, but you know what? I was pretty ignorant about them too. And I had all kinds of misunderstandings and miscomprehensions about them and what they really believed in and what they really aspired to. And I realized that if I want to be understood, I need to understand. And that dialogue is a two-way process by definition. And therefore I realized that this was really important. And as I got involved more and more, it raised all kinds of theological challenges for me. Not least of all, I'd never bothered to think about what does it mean that there are different religions in the world? What, if you like, is God saying to us in the existence of this enormous diversity? These were fascinating challenges for me, and challenges, if you like, my ethno-religio-particularism, and gave me, I would say that ethically I was universalist, but not theologically. And this encounter broadened my theological view of the world. And it was, I realized that not only was it important to overcome prejudice and bigotry, it was critical to working together for values we share, not least of all for the promotion of peace. And for me, two very other important corollaries which are connected with one another. I realized that in this work, I am performing, all of us who work in this field are performing a Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of the divine name. This is the supreme Jewish value. Judaism aspires not that there are values that we only die for, but above all that we live for. And how you live them and how you demonstrate them is of enormous consequence. As the Rambam says, that the true scholar and God-fearer is one whose actions lead people to praise God and applaud his revelation and his word. And I also realized that while Judaism affirms that every human person is created in the divine image, and therefore when we meet another, as already our sages say, and as modern philosophers, whether it's Martin Buber or Emmanuel Levinas or others, etc., affirm that when we truly encounter the other, we are in fact encountering the divine. When you encounter the other in the sense of the divine, in his or her own life, then you are actually encountering the divine in a manner that goes beyond the simple human encounter in and of itself. In other words, put differently, no religion can encapsulate the totality of the divine. That is a ridiculous idea. God is more than any one religion. And when we encounter other, and we cannot ever really know other religions and still be truly authentically rooted within our own heritage. But we can discover, if you like, little prisms, vignettes, reflections of the enormous complexity of the divine when we encounter people from other spiritual heritages and traditions. And therefore, I discovered that this was not just important ethically, not just important morally, but it was important spiritually. It was an enriching endeavor and engagement. And of course, after that, when you mentioned I became Chief Rabbi of Ireland, one of my predecessors, the man who succeeded Rabbi Herzog, was Rabbi Jakobowitz, who became the Chief Rabbi in England. He had a witticism which was 95% of Ireland is Catholic, 5% is Protestant, and I'm Chief Rabbi of the rest. So you can't do your job very well if you're not involved in interfaith relations. And I loved it. And at that time, there were very few Orthodox rabbis. I'm talking now 35 years ago in Ireland. Well, 40 years ago, I came to Ireland. There were very few Orthodox rabbis that really cared and loved the interfaith work. And this was, of course, pioneered by the liberal streams of Judaism, and Orthodoxy came in very late. but there was a desire in the world for Orthodox rabbis who did care, and I discovered that this was not only something meaningful, but it was something quite exciting. And I believe that during the Second World War, there was a slogan, join the army and see the world. I realized you could join Interfaith and see the world, and it was much nicer, much more fun, and you had a great sense that you were doing something significant. So I became deeply involved. So these two stages on my journey were really important, in particular in relation to the Catholic Church. Why? In Ireland, the closest personal relationship I built up in terms of my friendships with people from other faiths was with a Catholic priest who was responsible for the educational department of the Archdiocese. A wonderful human being who actually floored me in the first encounter when he came into my study, and he spoke about the enormous debt of Christianity to Judaism, the enormous guilt that true Christians should feel in terms of the way Christianity had treated Judaism down the ages, his enormous joy that we were now living in an era, something like 15 years, no less, 11, so where are we? Yes, it was 10 years after Nostra Aetate, and how much it was important for him to develop this connection with the Jewish people, his desire to be able to come to synagogue, to attend services. We became deep friends, and he introduced me to the world, which I really didn't know about, but this complete cheshbon nefesh, this reckoning of the soul, this enormous transformation that had taken place within the Catholic Church. And it was through him that I got to know the Cardinal of Cape Town, Cardinal McCann, and with him and Bishop Stephen Naidu, a wonderful man, both of them no longer alive, we established this interfaith forum, this Council of Christians. And then in Ireland, of course, all these relationships developed, and I also became academically involved. And I taught a course at the Irish School of Ecumenics on Jewish-Christian relations, and I was a member of the Academic Council of the Irish School of Ecumenics, which is part of Trinity University, Trinity College, the famous, actually, I believe, the first place where the first chair in Hebrew studies was established during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. And so it's also the place where the great Professor Weingery, great teacher of Hebrew, also had his own particular chair. And also, it was late in his life, but I had that good friendship with him. It was a very wonderful time there. But it meant that through this, I became more and more connected with the Catholic Church internationally. And because of my involvement in interfaith work, so participated in different organizations. We established in Ireland the Council of Christians and Jews, Catholics, Protestants, and Jews. I was also began to be invited to meetings of ICHKIC, the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Consultations, that was established in the 70s as the official counterpart to the Holy See's Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews. And
let us go now. You gave an extraordinary, detailed summary of your works and your involvement and the inspiration that brought you to this field. I suppose before this interview, I read a search a little bit about you. We are almost in the same age, because you were born in 51, I am 50. So we reached the age to make a cheshbon nefesh, a balance and analysis, a deep analysis of our achievements, our failures, but just in order to complete the picture that you gave us, a personal question: did you receive a special message from your father, because your father was also a rabbi? And on this,
it's a wonderful question. It's a wonderful question. I believe that it was the Jesuits who said, "Give me a child to the age of 7, and we can turn him into either a pope or a chief thief." In other words, that the first 7 years are so critical in determining the outcome of a person's life. My father died when I was only 10 years old, and he'd been sick for a year and a half beforehand. So essentially, I can see now how profound those first 8 years of my life was upon me. It's almost as if he's put his DNA footprint on me, and I am some just replica of in so many ways. Because even though I never met people of other religions on a religious basis, I did meet people who are not Jews, many, because my father was, as you mentioned, a famous rabbi in England, and he founded the first Jewish public school, known as the Jewish Eden. That was Carmel College, where there were students from over 25 countries, more than 350 students, and it was a very special institution. And he established a school with the idea of producing a new generation of Plato and Rabbi Akiva in one, people who would be the inheritors of the depth of their Jewish heritage and at the same time of the world's secular heritage, and that these should be synthesized into one. And so I grew up, for me, my deep rootedness in Jewish orthodoxy was never in conflict with a sense of universalism and vice versa. So I grew up very much with an openness to the world. I never felt wounded, thank God. I don't think I ever experienced anti-Semitism as a child. I didn't even really know what it was. So that was also a great blessing, I think, not to have any scars at all. And a great deal of curiosity. So even though he died when I was still a boy, the influence was profound. And it certainly influenced, if you like, my ethical worldview, and made it very natural for me to move into this field.
Okay, now to the second question. What can you tell us about your personal, quotation size, achievements in this field? And in general, what do you consider that are the great achievements of the dialogue at large, and specifically in the work that we together are working so especially, which is the field of the Catholic, the Jewish Catholic relations? Because we are very related, and we are shutafim, we are partners in this challenge, accepting this great challenge. And I don't know if you are going to agree with me, but my feeling is that we got a lot since Nostra Aetate until now. We were huge achievements, but we are still on the beginning of the way.
Absolutely. We are indeed in the golden age of Jewish Catholic relations. There has never been an era like the one we live in today. And often, in fact, it's almost a mark of the incredible success that often people simply don't realize how far we have come. And that's especially the case in North America, where relations generally between Catholics and Jews are so good that people don't realize how bad they were. So it's an amazing transformation within just a period of less than 70 years. How many years? Since 65, 55 years, just 55 years or 56 years.
56
so,
years.
So it's very important for me to emphasize the obvious, that we today stand on the shoulders of giants who pioneered the path before us. And they did so very often at significant cost. It wasn't always easy to be able to engage the Christian world from the point of view of the internal politics and dynamics within the Jewish community. The attitude that is summed up in the approach of the late, great Rabbi Eliezer Berkowitz was quite typical for most of the earliest decades, and certainly the period immediately after the war, which was, the Christian world has done us too much damage and too much harm for us to be able to extend the hand of friendship. They need to prove their bona fides over generations before we will be ready to even. Thank God, there were great people, people like, I believe, your teacher, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Even Rabbi Soloveitchik played a very significant role, even though his approach was very different. In Europe, there were the great personalities of Rabbi Hertz and Rabbi Jacob Kaplan, and later, of course, people like Elio Toaf in Italy and others. So there were so many really remarkable rabbis and scholars who did not take that approach and who realized that there was an amazing opportunity taking place in the wake of the terrible Shoah. Because as much as the Shoah was a Jewish tragedy, obviously not exclusively Jewish, but an overwhelmingly Jewish tragedy, it was a Christian scandal because it was perpetrated by ostensibly baptized Christians in ostensibly Christian lands, overwhelmingly. The impact of that took time to be able to follow through. Obviously, there were the great pioneers, and from our point of view, this man was a messenger sent from heaven in the personality of John the 23rd, for whom we must give, if you like, copyright. But he wasn't alone. There were the other remarkable individuals in this process. And there are people that preceded me in my position, like Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum of blessed memory, and Rabbi James Rudin, still may he be preserved for many years. And then another mutual friend of ours who was a great pioneer, Rabbi Leon Klenicki. All these people made significant contributions along the way. So we are really blessed to live in this generation where we have been given the opportunity by the Almighty to benefit from the pioneering work of others and to be at the cusp of this revolutionary transformation. And just to highlight how revolutionary it is, I mean, obviously these things for you are obvious, but they're not, as I say, obvious for everybody. There are processes in the course of history where changes occur and attitudes develop for better and for worse. But I don't think there's anything comparable in human history where a particular community has been viewed as the worst of all peoples, rejected by God, the enemy of God, in league with the devil, responsible for some of the worst events and afflictions in the world, to be completely shunned, to have gone from being a people like that to one whom you now describe, in the words of St. John Paul II, the dearly beloved elder brother of the church of the original covenant, never broken, never to be broken, where you have three popes who have affirmed that anti-Semitism is totally incompatible with Christianity, even though, of course, Nostra Aetate already referred to that, but the language of John Paul II, reiterated by Benedict and by Francis, that anti-Semitism is a sin and incompatible, is so dramatic, to a point where I'm not saying we've eradicated anti-Semitism within the Catholic Church, but today, and I can give you actually concrete examples of where if somebody is put forward to be appointed as a bishop, but is identified as having expressed anti-Semitic opinions, he will not be appointed as a bishop. That's an incredible achievement. There is nothing comparable in such a transformation in terms of attitudes. And we are now living at a period where we have a pope who probably, since Peter, there has never been a pope who has known the Jewish community as well as he does. And it's thanks to people like you, personal friendships, and the fact that he's been open to having Jews in his cathedral, that he's gone to Jewish worship and celebration, that we have a pope here who may occasionally put his foot wrong and may say things sometimes that we find might be problematic, but there's absolutely no shadow of doubt in anybody's mind that this man is a passionate friend of the Jewish people, a true lover of the Jewish people. So that's an incredible transformation. And for us to have been at this juncture, be engaged in that process, and the word process is important, it's an enormous privilege, because processes, you can't rest on your laurels. New generations are coming along, and it has to be a continuous process of engagement. Just as friendship has to be sustained, so intergroup and interreligious understanding has to be sustained. Today, as you know, and St. Joseph's is part of it, you have in the United States over 30 institutions working in the field of Jewish-Catholic relations. Now, that is not only a testimony to the transformation of Jewish-Catholic relations, it's also a testimony to the United States, where you have a vibrant Catholic and Jewish community living alongside one another, where neither actually dominates. Both live in religious freedom, committed to their society, and that they have, if you like, common interests that bring them together and that deepen that relationship. The United States is an example where the transformation at the Olympian heights has really been internalized down to the grassroots. And that's visible also in Catholic education, as both your colleague Phil Cunningham has done studies in this area, and before him, Sister Rose Tearing, to show how remarkable the educational transformation is. But there are other parts of the Catholic world, certain parts that you know much better than me, certain places within Latin America, where there are not vibrant Jewish communities as there were and are in Buenos Aires, and places in Africa and in Southeast Asia, where there are no Jews there. And Jews don't even feature on the radar screen. And there you still have preconciliar attitudes and stereotypes and canards that still exist as they exist in the past. So there's still an enormous educational challenge ahead to be able to ensure that things really reach the rank and file across the board, both horizontally as well as vertically within the church. But you know the difference between the optimist and the pessimist. We know what that difference is. But why does the pessimist see the glass half empty? And why does the optimist see it half full? The pessimist is unrealistic. He comes on from on top, he's expecting to see a full glass. And therefore he looks down and he's disappointed with everything that's missing. The optimist comes from underneath, he knows that the glass was originally empty, and therefore he can celebrate every drop that's within it. When we think where we were 80 years ago, after the Shoah, after a situation where Christian theologians justified the bestialities of the Shoah on the grounds that Jews deserved it before their rejection of Jesus, where the Shoah was not a Christian enterprise, God forbid, but can never have succeeded to the way it did if it had not been nurtured by Christian teaching of contempt over centuries. So where we are today, how can you be anything other than optimist? That's an incredible transformation. And so there have been a number of highlights in my life, both personal ones and institutional ones. I think of all the meetings I think I met with John Paul II maybe 13 times, and with Benedict even more. And of course, I haven't met with Francis as many as you, but nevertheless, it's also something of the same order. And there have been, for example, at the commemoration of Assisi commemoration of the World Day of Prayer for Peace. I participated in 3 of those in Assisi. They were definitely significant moments. The honor to be able to address the Synod on the Middle East, where I was the only Jewish speaker there, and the first time ever a Jew was invited to address the Synod dealing with a region, and specifically dealing with Christianity in the Middle East, was another highlight. In more recent times, the release of the 2015 document of the Holy See's Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews. God does not repent of the gifts and the calling of God. He does not repent of. We're using the quotation from Paul. Invited to be able to share the podium at the release of that document together with Cardinal Koch. Again, the first time Jew is invited to be able to respond at the release of a document. Quite remarkable. These are just some of the amazing highlights, or the event which is in the interface between the religion and the political too. Obviously, I would say from a personal point of view, the most exciting process was the negotiating of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Israel and the Holy See. To have been part of the team of 4 or 5 people that negotiated that agreement was really exciting. To have been at the culmination of it was remarkable. To be part of the Chief Rabbinate's Commission, that was actually the result of John Paul II's initiative, has been also a wonderful opportunity, because that commission is not just a commission for dialogue. It has often been a far more effective conduit than ICHKIC, the International Jewish Committee for its consultations, to be able to communicate concerns. In fact, it's probably the most effective institutional vehicle. And of course, I was chairman twice of ICHKIC, and therefore representing the Jewish people at that level, as well as when I was president of the Council of Christians and Jews. All those events gave me opportunities for interaction which were really remarkable. But I think that the pilgrimages of the 3 popes were very significant. And then, of course, there was the event that we participated in together that Pope Francis convened after his visit to the Holy Land of prayers for peace in the garden, in the Vatican Gardens. I think that was wonderful. It was truly moving and was a testimony. It was also a missed opportunity.
You know, I worked a lot in order to get the presence of Mahmoud Abbas in the Vatican Gardens. The first plan was to realize this meeting in Jerusalem, in a neutral place of the Vatican, a place that the Vatican has sovereignty on that. But okay, at the end it was in the Vatican's gardens. Something that I would like to tell you is this. For us, it's very, very clear that we are living in a very special time, as never before during this 2,000 years of Christianity. And late President Perez' wish was to receive during his presidency Pope Francis. So he knew that I'm a very close friend to him. So I was a bridge between Perez and his cabinet and the Pope Francis. And I worked on that. Years after his pilgrimage to Israel, with the reception of Perez as president of Israel, Perez invited me and Sylvia for a meeting in his house, and he explained me he was in his 90s, let's say half an hour before he passed away, and during 1 hour he explained me what is his dream for the world and for the Middle East and for Israel. Incredible. So he gave me a gift, one of the books that a journalist prepared for him, a book of questions and answers about his history and so on and so on. And on the dedication, he wrote these words that you have said a few minutes ago. This is a unique time, a very special time of the relationships. Pragmatically, what do you consider that we can do, we have to do in order to project with more power, in a more, I would say, positive way, as far as we can, what should be the next steps in order to get that?
Well, I suppose relationships have many commonalities, common themes, and perhaps the most important relationship of all, if we take the Bible as our inspiration, is the marriage between a man and a woman. And if we think about that for a moment, there is, of course, the period of the honeymoon. There are the initial years of intense romantic relationships in a good relationship. But in a really good relationship, you move from, if you like, the heady romance to a more solid foundation of genuine partnership, friendship, and real profound amity, in which you are sensitive to one another's pains, concerns, and in which you can resonate with one another. And I don't think that there's anything that Jews can expect of the Catholic Church in terms of any further theological changes. I think that we have come as far as we can in legitimate mutual expectations of one another theologically. Now that there have been statements, of course, W. Emet was a little bit ahead of the curve, but there have been 2 Orthodox statements now, in 2015, to do the will of our Father in heaven, and then a document 2 years later from Jerusalem to Rome. I would say, again, utilizing the imagery I spoke about before, at the Olympian heights, I don't think there is much more expect. What we can and should expect is that these heights know how to be translated into much wider dissemination and implementation. Now, let me start of all with a certain amount of self-criticism. I've spoken about the fact that Orthodoxy has come into this area, but still it is a very small minority within Orthodoxy in Israel that understands how far we've come. The vast majority of Israeli Jews still live with a greater or lesser extent of a medieval mentality when it comes to the Christian world. And even though they have seen changes in the personality of popes who have come here, there is no significant educational internalization of this transformation within Israeli society at large. Now, of course, it's fair to say this is not an equal relationship. Historically, the burden is first and foremost on the Catholic Church. And we have to take into account attitudes like those of Rabbi Berkowitz, who I referred to earlier, that it will take a time before we can overcome the wounds of history, to become more genuinely open on the part of the majority of Jewish people, certainly living within the state of Israel. And of course, one needs to bear in mind that the majority of Israelis have never met a modern Christian. Even though we travel abroad disproportionately, when we travel abroad, we meet non-Jews as non-Jews, not as modern Christians. And therefore, the image of Christianity is overwhelmingly taken from tragic negative past. So we have an enormous challenge ahead of us internally within the Jewish community to be able to change minds and hearts with regards to their approach towards Christianity. Thank God we have some wonderful classic resources within Judaism of very positive attitudes and approaches. But these are not even known by rabbis. I'll just tell you a story. My involvement with the chief rabbin is really thanks to John Paul II, because even though, of course, when I was chief rabbi of Ireland, my rabbinic ordination is from the Orthodox world, in fact, from the Haredi world. I studied in Mir, and I have smicha from Mir and Ponovich, and from these Haredi institutions, even though I left them to serve in the Israeli army as a soldier, and then, as I told you, as a chaplain. And then as chief rabbi of Israel, obviously the chief rabbi of Ireland, obviously the chief rabbi of Israel had to recognize my kashrut certificates, my divorces, when I was involved to some extent in the area of conversions. But when I came to Israel, I didn't have any interest in being involved within the religious establishment, which in all honesty, I consider to be more of a problem for the Jewish religion than an asset and an inspiration. But here is something which I should have added in my biography, but my introduction is too long anyway. I am the beneficiary of other people's absence and ignorance. So that, for example, when contact started between Israel and the Holy See that led to the negotiations and the establishment of diplomatic relations, normally the foreign ministry would not have turned to somebody from outside the foreign ministry to be part of the team that would negotiate essentially a diplomatic accord, even though it was much more than that. But there was a recognition that this was not just a diplomatic and, if you like, a legal document. It was a relationship between two religious heritages, and therefore there should be somebody on the Jewish side who at least knows the difference between the Catholic and Protestant, if not between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. So as a result, I'm brought in because there were other people that simply didn't have the knowledge, the familiarity, and the experience. When that paved the way for the visit of John Paul II in the year 2000, because this was a great dream of his to come to the Holy Land. And he took the initiative to meet with the chief rabbis of Israel and the chief rabbinic council. And at that meeting, he requested that there be a bilateral commission with the chief rabbinate and the Holy See. Chief rabbinate wasn't interested in it. They don't even have a commission for a dialogue with other kinds of Jews. They would never have thought of establishing a commission for a dialogue with another religion. But when a pope asks you, it's rather difficult to say no. So again, they needed an Orthodox rabbi who knew what he was doing. So as a result, I'm asked to become their advisor and then become part of their commission because I am the beneficiary of the ignorance and sometimes the absence of others. And so that, how on earth did I get onto that? What were we talking about before?
About the next steps that we should right. make in order to
Yes, I was going somewhere else, but I've gone and lost my train of thought. But at any rate, the work of this Chief Rabbinate Council itself is not well known enough in Israeli society. And we need to do more. There's also political issues internally as to how this is affected one way or another. And that has inevitably some kind of impact. I'm not talking about foreign policy politics. I'm talking about the fact that with regards to the Chief Rabbinate itself, there are all kinds of political issues involved to determine the approach of the individuals who are at the top of the structure at any given time. And so we have to deal with all these things. But so there is an enormous challenge internally. But the challenge for the Catholic Church is above all to bring this to the rank and file across the world. It is, in my opinion, forgive me, I hope and Catholics listening to this would forgive me especially, it is, in my opinion, quite outrageous that now, more than half a century after Nostra Aetate, the teachings of the magisterium concerning Jews and Judaism are not a required part of the syllabus for the formation of priests. So I come across priests and sometimes even bishops from certain parts of the world who don't even know the content of Nostra Aetate. I have to teach them about what the magisterium, I as a Jew, rabbi, have to tell them what their magisterium teaches. Now, all my attempts to try to see whether some kind of centralized instruction can come out from the Holy See to address this question have failed. I'm told that one of the blessings of the Second Vatican Ecumenical Council is the liability, that directions are not given from Rome, they have to be done by each bishop's conference to handle it. I'm not sure I find that argument satisfactory, but certainly there's a lot that needs to be done to ensure that the new theology, as the late Gerhard Riegner used to describe it, is part and parcel of the bread and butter of the church. It's not yet. This is the big challenge. It's an educational challenge. And we have another situation today where with the older generation of priests, there is still, if not the memory of the Shoah, the impact of the Shoah. There is now a young generation that grows up that doesn't see Jews, that see Jews as strong, that see Jews through the lens of the power of the state of Israel, that see Jews through the lens of success of the Jewish community in the United States. And as a result, don't think that they have any need to be able to address that. Now, that's really problematic because the basis for addressing the relationship with the Jewish people shouldn't have to depend upon the condition of the Jewish people. It should have to do with the nature of, as the guidelines for Nostra Aetate indicate, understanding the very roots of Christianity itself. And that is not fully understood enough by the younger generation of priests. And therefore, there is an educational challenge which is enormous, which is not being adequately addressed. And when I raise this with different people, they will say, well, yes, of course, you're right, but there are so many bigger issues that we have to address. This is not at the top of our priority.
David, I thank you a lot for everything, so not only for this interview, but it's a good opportunity to remember many things, how we had very deep, serious, and challenge conversations walking alongside the Tiber in English, Tevere in Italian, walking about these themes in a burning way, really, because we discussed about very serious items, issues. So, David, with the hope to have the possibilities to see each the other, but no, not by Zoom, personally in some place in Jerusalem and Rome or wherever. And my best wishes for you, for your family, and Shalom al Israel.
Thank you, and to you and yours. A pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. Kol tov. תודה רבה לך, באמת נהניתי מאוד.
בשמחה רבה.
מי כמוך בנושא הזה, מי כמוך בנושא הזה.
תודה.
אבל באמת הופתעתי, אבא שלך נולד ברדונסק, או הוא היה מצאצאי רדונסק?
אבא שלו נולד ברדונסק.
אבא שלו.
הוא נולד בעצם, אחיו הבכור, שהיה שנתיים יותר מבוגר ממנו, נולד בקושי באנגליה אחרי שירדו מהאונייה, והוא נולד שנתיים אחר כך בלונדון.
הוא עבר, הסבא שלך ואבא שלך עברו את השואה ברדונסק? לא.
לא.
מתי הגיעו ללונדון?
אבא שלי נולד ב-1913, אז הם עברו לאנגליה ב-1911. אבל רוב המשפחה של אבא נרצחה בשואה.
אתה יודע שהסבים שלי נולדו, שני הסבים, הסבתא מצד אמי נולדה בלודג', אבל אבי בלודג'.
אז גם בעצם ליתר דיוק, המשפחה של הסבא שלי הגיעה מרדונסק, הם היו חסידי רדונסק, אבל הם נולדו בלודג'.
כי זה היה אותו אזור, והסבים שלי, האבא שלי, אמי נולדה בלודג', זה היה אותו אזור. אפילו אני חושב שהעיר שהייתה קרובה לקלצה, שהאבא שלי נולד בה, וגם כן הסבא והסבתא, זאת אומרת הוריו, השם של המקום זה קינסק, וקינסק היה אחד מן הפוסקים הכי גדולים בפולניה, ויינגרטן, חלקת יואב יהושע ויינגרטן, חלקת יואב. אז הם נולדו שם, אבל זה היה אותו האזור, מאוד קרוב לקינץ, היה פשיסחה, ואפילו אני חושב שלאיזה זמן הגוברניה של האזור של קינץ הייתה רדום, זאת אומרת, העיר, ואחרי כן זה עבר לקלץ דומני, משהו כזה. אבל לא תיארתי לעצמי שהשורשים גם כן הם שלנו, הם כל כך קרובים. כל טוב לך.
כל טוב. ברכות לבביות.
להתראות. שלום על ישראל.